Welcome to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to cross over your favorite pop culture characters through the blind eternities so they can command your deck with style. If you really enjoy what you see here today and would like to see this channel grow, check us out on TikTok and Patreon. The links will be in the description section down below. It looks like this portal is stabilizing, so let's get on with this show. Rick and Morty first came into our lives back in December 2013 on Adult Swim. It features Rick and Morty, the titular characters, are grandfather and grandson. They go on crazy adventures throughout the universe because Rick is the smartest man in the universe. He's figured out portal technology and is able to travel instantaneously between different dimensions, different time periods, different universes. The show is absolutely insane. And to go along with that, this is going to be completely insane. Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be some interference with the... Wait. Oh, gee, Rick. What's going on? I turned this into magic cards, Morty. Boom! Big reveal. I can tap X untapped artifacts and look through the whole deck and find what I want and throw the rest away, and I guess you get to make rocks. I turned this into magic cards, Morty. Now, I've received a lot of comments talking about how Rick would be blue or green, or that Rick and Morty would be green or black. So, here's my 2 cents about the whole thing. Rick is the epitome of knowledge and seeking knowledge. He's the smartest man in the universe. And Morty is a dumb kid who loves his grandpa a whole lot. Well, until he kind of hates him. Either way, he runs on feeling. So, these two work perfectly as a blue and a red card. Now, the reason why I chose Glacian, the Power Stone Engineer, and Togo Goblin Weaponsmith is because we've got an artificer working at the top of his game to make sure he can answer anything that he needs to with his technology. And then we've got an artificer on the bottom of his game whose height of technology is making rocks. And that just fits Rick and Morty so well. Now that Rick turned him and Morty into magic cards, it's time to check out the strategy and rule 0 for this deck. This deck gets Morty out as early as possible to make a bunch of artifacts that Rick can use to cycle through your deck to look for wins. This deck sits comfortably at high-end casual tables. Now, to claim victory with this deck, once we have used Rick to find the right pieces, we blow up the whole table using our insane levels of knowledge and our complete lack of care. This is the perfect time to remind you that this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget-friendly as possible. To start this high fantasy adventure that Morty likes to go on all the time, we've got Is It Boiler Works. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for blue and red. Then we've got Dormant Volcano. Enters tapped. When Dormant Volcano enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return an untapped mountain you control to its owner's hand. Then it taps for 1 and 1 red. Then we've got Myriad Landscape. It enters tapped, but you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to search your library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type. Put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then Coral Atoll does the same thing as Dormant Volcano, but for an island. And then Guildless Commons does the same thing as Is It Boiler Works, except for 2 generic mana. Now, the card on here that works the best in this deck is Teferi's Isle. It's an older card, it has phasing, and it comes into play tapped, but you can tap it for 2 blue mana. Now, the reason why that's important is because every other turn, it'll phase out, and then it'll constantly give you landfall triggers for Morty to make more rocks every other turn. Then we've got Silver Bluff Bridge. It enters tapped, but it's indestructible as an artifact land, and it gives you a blue or red. Then we have Seat of the Synod and Great Furnace, and both artifact lands that give blue and red respectively. And then Darksteel Citadel, which taps for colorless and is also an artifact land that's indestructible. Then we've got Prismari Campus. It enters tapped, but adds a blue or a red, and then you can tap 4 and scry. Then we've got Storm-Carved Coast. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, but it taps for a blue and a red. And then we've got Riverglide Pathway that can tap for either a red or a blue, depending on what side you put it down on. And to finish off the lands, we've got 8 mountains and 13 islands. As Rick once bluntly put, he needs Morty for an adventure. Kind of like you need a doorstop for a door, but a rock would do just fine too. So, we've got some mana rocks. We've got Soul Ring that's pay 1 and then taps for 2. And then we've got an Armillary Sphere for 2 generic. You can tap 2 and sacrifice it to search for 2 basic lands to put them into your hand. Then we've got Burnished Heart for 3, and then 3, sacrifice the Burnished Heart, search for 2 basic lands, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then we've got Basalt, Monolith, and Rings of Bright Hearth. These 2 cards can give us infinite colorless mana. And then we've got Inspiring Statuary. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise, which will allow us to use all of our rocks to pay for generic mana cost of bigger spells that we have in the deck. Then we've got Gear for Orrery. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. Then we've got Stormvault. Whenever 1 or more creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create a colorless treasure artifact token. And at the beginning of your end step, if you control 5 or more artifacts, transform Storm the Vault. And this will turn into a land that can tap and add a blue for every artifact that you have on the table, which is going to give us a lot of ramp. And then we've got Blinkmoth Urn. It says, for 5 mana, it says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blinkmoth Urn is untapped, that player adds generic mana for each artifact they control, and you can actually tap this with Rick's ability to make sure that your opponents can't take advantage of this as well. And then we've got Storm Cauldron. Each player may play an additional land during each of his or her turns, and whenever a land is tapped for mana, return it to its owner's hand. This will mess our opponents up and give us a benefit because we want to keep getting our lands back so we can keep making more rocks with Morty's ability. Now we can go over some of the side characters for the deck. We've got Summer, who's Emery Lurker of the Loch for 2 and 1 blue. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, and when Emery Lurker of the Loch enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. Choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. Then we've got Beth as Joyra Weatherlight Captain for 2, a blue, and a red. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. And then we've got Brudiclad Telcor Engineer, who's going to be our Mr. Poopy Butthole for 4 and a blue and a red. And he says creature tokens you control have haste, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue mirror artifact creature token. And when you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token. Then we've got Mr. Meeseeks, the Riddle Keeper, for 2 and a blue. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Then we've got Bird Person as Malcolm Kenight Navigator for 2 and a blue. He has flying, and whenever 1 or more pirates you control deal damage to your opponent, you create a treasure token for each opponent dealt damage. Then we've got Squanch, Breach's Brazen Plunderer. He has Menace. Whenever 1 or more pirates you control deal damage to your opponents, exile the top card of each of those opponents' libraries. You may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color in order to do so. And then we've got Gearhead as the Wildfield Scarecrow for 3 generic mana. He's got Defender, and you can pay 2 and sacrifice him to go search for 2 basic land cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. I think Rick was talking about shuffling something, so for that, we've got Quest of Ancient Secrets for 1 blue. It's an enchantment. It says whenever a card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you may put a quest counter on Quest for the Ancient Secrets, and remove 5 quest counters from Quest of Ancient Secrets and sacrifice it. Target player shuffles his or her graveyard into their library. And then Elixir of Immortality for 1 generic, and then you tap 2. You gain 5 life and shuffle Elixir of Immortality and your graveyard into their owner's library. Then we've got Felden's Cane for 1 generic. You can tap and remove it from the game to shuffle your graveyard into your library. Then we've got Clear the Mind for 2 and a blue. To target player shuffles their library and graveyard together, draw a card. And then we've got Days Undoing. Each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into his or her library, then draws 7 cards. If it's your turn, end of the turn, and that's for 2 and a blue. Then we've got Midnight Clock for 2 and a blue. It says tap and add 1 blue mana, or at the beginning of each upkeep, put an hour counter on Midnight Clock. When the 12th hour counter is put onto Midnight Clock, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, then draw 7 cards, exile Midnight Clock. Then we've got Learn from the Past for 3 and a blue. It's an instant. Target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her hand, into his or her library, and draws a card. And then we've got Psychic Spiral for 4 and a blue. It's an instant. It says shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. Target player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. These effects are absolutely crucial because Rick is throwing most of your deck into the graveyard, so basically you just pull one of these cards and shuffle everything back in. And now we can look at all the different Mortys. We've got Togo Goblin Weaponsmith as our partner commander. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Rock. With equipped creature has 1, tap, sacrifice the rock. This creature deals 2 damage to any target, and equip for 1. We're not going to be using that part of the ability. We're just going to be making rocks. Then we've got Goblin Welder for 1 red. It says tap, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, the player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. Then we have Goblin Engineer for 1 and a red. When Goblin Engineer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library, and then pay a red and tap and sacrifice an artifact. Return target artifact card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then we've got Reckless Fireweaver for 1 and a red. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. Then we have Walking Atlas for 2 generic. You can tap it, and you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Then Audacious Reshaper for 2 and a red. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an artifact card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Audacious Reshaper deals damage to you equal to the number of cards revealed this way. Then we've got Scare Tiller for 4, generic. Whenever Scare Tiller becomes tapped, choose 1. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, or return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Then we've got Solemn Simulacrum for 4. Whenever Solemn enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And when he dies, you may draw a card. Having reached the Citadel of Ricks, we get to see different versions of Rick now. We've got Dreamscape Artist for 1 and a blue. It says for 2 and a blue, tap it, discard a card, sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Then we have Psi Masterthopterist for 2 and a blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token. And you can pay 1 and a blue to sacrifice 2 artifacts and draw a card. Then we've got Portal Mage for 2 and a blue. It's got Flash, and when Portal Mage enters the battlefield during the Declare Attacker step, you may reselect which player or planeswalker target attacking creature is attacking. And then we've got Padim, Console of Innovation for 3 and a blue. Artifacts you control have hexproof. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, draw a card. Then for 4 and 2 red, we've got the Hellkite Tyrant. It's got Flying and Trample, and whenever Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, you gain control of all artifacts that player controls. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. And then obviously we've got our commander, Glacian, the Power Stone Engineer. And he says for 5 and a blue, you can play him, and then you tap him, tap X untapped artifacts you control, look at the top X cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Let's check out some of Rick's gadgets now. We've got the 1,000-Year Elixir for 3 generic mana. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. And for 1 and tapping, you can untap target creature. Then we've got Portal of Sanctuary for 2 and a blue. It says pay 1, return target creature you control and each aura attached to it to their owner's hand. Activate this ability only during your turn. And then we've got Erratic Portal for 4 generic. It has a similar ability. For 1, you can tap it, return target creature to owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. And these will be used to save any of our creatures if something's happening and we need to get them off the board. And then we've got Efficient Construction for 3 and a blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Then Mirrodin Besieged for 2 and a blue. As Mirrodin Besieged enters the battlefield, choose Mirrodin or Phyrexian. The Mirrodin side of it gives you, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. And the Phyrexian side says at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard a card. Then if there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. Then we've got Pia's Revolution for 2 and a red. Whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution deal 3 damage to him or her. Then we've got Thopter Spy Network for 2 and 2 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. And whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal damage, combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then we've got Swiftfoot Boots for 2 generic mana. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste and has an equip cost for 1. And then we have Staff of Domination for 3 generic. It's an artifact that does a lot of stuff. For 1, you can untap it. For 2 and a tap, you can gain 1 life. For 3 and a tap, you can untap target creature. For 4 and a tap, you can tap target creature. And for 5 and a tap, you can draw a card. Then we have Lightning Greaves for 2 generic mana. Equipped creature has haste and shroud with an equip cost of 0. Then we have Ingenuity Engine for 7 generic mana. It has Cascade. And when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast this without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. And you can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice an artifact. Return target artifact you control to its owner's hand. So the way this would work is once we have infinite mana, we can play our entire deck this way. Then we've got Darksteel Plate For 3 generic mana, it's indestructible and has equipped creature has indestructible, and equip cost is 2. Then we have Crucible of Worlds. I couldn't think of a more fitting card to sit in this deck. For 3 generic mana, it's an artifact and it says you may play land cards from your graveyard. So when we use Rick's ability and dump a good portion of our deck into the graveyard, we can play all those lands as if they were in our hand. Then we've got Altar of the Brood for 1 generic mana. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. You gotta have the snake holder under your pant leg, after all. And then we've got Mere Welder for 3 generic. It has Imprint, which is tap and exile target artifact card from a graveyard. Mere Welder has all activated abilities of all cards exiled with it. It's got a unique combo with the Basalt Monolith and the Staff of Domination from earlier. We can exile both of those cards from the graveyard, put it on the Mere Welder, and then make infinite mana that way. These cards will really prove that Rick is the smartest man in the universe. We start out with Saheeli's Directive. For X mana and then 3 red mana, it has Improvise. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 generic cost of this spell. And reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of artifact cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into the graveyard. This card has dumped like 15 artifacts onto the board at one time when I've been testing this deck. And then we've got Finale of Revelation for X and 2 blue. Draw X cards if X is 10 or more. Instead, shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and then you exile Finale of Revelation. Then we've got Drown in Dreams for X, 2 generic, and then a blue. Choose one if you control a commander as you cast this spell. You may choose both. Target player draws X cards, and target player mills twice X cards. So this can help us draw some cards, or it can mill both of our opponents for a lot. And then we've got Red Sun Zenith for X and a red. Red Sun Zenith deals X damage to target creature or player. If a creature dealt damage this way would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. And then you shuffle Red Sun Zenith into its owner's library. Then we've got Blue Sun Zenith for X and 3 blue. Target player draws X cards, and then you shuffle Blue Sun Zenith into its owner's library. Then we've got Mechanized Production for 2 and 2 blue. Enchant an artifact you control. And at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of enchanted artifact. Then if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. Then we have Rise and Shine. For 1 and a blue, it says target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 1/1 counters on each artifact that becomes a creature this way. And you can pay the Overload for 4 and 2 blue to turn all of your rocks into 4/4s and smash some face. And then we've got Dragon Shift for 1, a blue, and a red. Until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a 4/4 blue and red dragon and loses all abilities and gains flying. Or for 3, 2 blue, and 2 red, all of your creatures do that. And then we have Splinter Twin. It gives you, for 2 and 2 red, enchanted creature has tap. Put a token that's a copy of this creature onto the battlefield. That token has haste. Exile it at the beginning of your next end step. And then Rick's almighty weapon, the Butter Robot. Corridor Monitor. For 1 and a blue, when Corridor Monitor enters the battlefield, untap target artifact or creature you control. So how this will work is you enchant Corridor Monitor with Splinter Twin. And then this will allow you to make infinite butter robots and then smash face with an army of butter robots. And I couldn't think of a more perfect way to end the game as Rick and Morty. Now that we've finished with Rick and Morty's deck, we can take a look at the average price and the stats for it. The average price at time of release is between $206 and $257, depending on where you purchase from, and that's in US dollars. Obviously, if you're willing to play with damaged or heavily played cards, that price can go way down. And then we've got our stats. We've got 11 ramp cards, which isn't too bad in blue and red. And then we've got 4 tutors-ish, kinda. Rick acts as a pretty good tutor for most of what you need. And then we've only got 7 card draw spells in a blue deck. And I know what you're going to say. What the hell? But with Rick's ability, you really don't need them. And then we've only got 6 interaction spells. Again, you're going to tell me in a blue deck, what the hell are you doing? But this deck is more interested in doing its own thing and getting out its win, which is also why we don't have a board wipe. And in the wise words of some pretty big players in the game, why do you need card removal when you've got player removal? And then we've got 34 lands to round out this deck. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to crossover, check out our Patreon where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.